This iPad Basic session for parents covers the key content from the session run at the school earlier in the year. The aim is to familiarise parents with some of the key information and the key settings that are available to them, particularly for those times when they're working with their students on homework, etc. on the iPad. We see here the topics that we're going to cover tonight. These are the topics that are most requested or most asked for by parents, so hopefully they will be of interest to you as well. My key piece of information in regards to Apple IDs is just stressing that point that we made on enrolment, that it is really important that each child has their own individual Apple ID. It really is not successful for your child to share an Apple ID with yourself or to share one with another sibling. It creates a lot of confusion and a lot of issues when the students are downloading apps to their individual devices, as well as particular issues when it comes to backing up to their iCloud account. So we do stress that an individual Apple ID for each child is important. Whether you choose to manage those through family sharing or keep them independent is fine. The suggestions we gave for people who weren't using family sharing was that if your child was under 13, you can set up the Apple ID for them and keep control of the password or the rescue questions, etc., so that you still maintain that control until they're 13. Alternative, like we said, using the family sharing, but each individual child has their own Apple ID. That's really important when it comes to their device for school. There were some parents who had started the process by linking the students' Apple IDs to their credit card, but have now decided to change that and make the child's account linked purely to an iTunes card, which is what we suggest for anybody who's not using the family sharing. The family sharing actually requires the credit card. So if you're not using family sharing and are not sure how to change the details from your credit card to being iTunes card, so it's up to your child to monitor, their usage, and they can't go spending lots of money on the credit card, then the Apple support website, which is listed here, has information on that. Also family sharing and iCloud and all of the other things that you may wish to know. The instructions for changing your payment details are spelled out like all of the things on the Apple support site, with screenshots and quite clear instructions. So if that's something that you need to do, that's fine, but just remembering there is particular reasons why we request an Apple ID for each child.
Right, so we are going to take a particular look in the restrictions section of our general settings. However, just to be aware, on eCat in our iPad portal, there is a PDF document that runs you through various settings and restrictions that we suggest from the school perspective, and that will look at various other areas down this left-hand side, as well as taking a look in this restrictions section. So it is really worthwhile for those people who are new to the iPad to take a look through each of these menus and just see the plethora of information or options that are available as you go through and set up the iPad. Again, that's helping to familiarise you with the device that your child's using. So if we move to our restrictions, if you haven't done any setting of restrictions, yours will say off. If you've already set some restrictions, that will say on. So when we go in, if we haven't done any restriction setting, you'll see that everything is greyed out. So I need to enable the restrictions. You need to set a passcode. And obviously, this is a passcode that is different from the one that your child's using to access the iPad. So if we set it, it asks us to do it again. And then I have all of the options. Now, each one of these I can set individually. So for example, in this allow section, if I do that, I have gone blank because it doesn't. There we go, we're back. If I choose to get rid of the camera, then the person using the iPad won't have the camera. Siri is one that we usually turn off at school. There are occasions when she would be useful, so that one would be more left to students to use unless there's a particular reason that you're wanting to block that. All of these things too can be accessed by your child using the iPad, but if you disable things in this restriction setting, it overrides anything else. So they can't make a change if it doesn't allow them to in here. So things like AirDrop, we do use at school from time to time. So that would be something that we wouldn't particularly restrict in this section. When we get down to these sorts of ones, the ones we're looking at particularly is down in this installing, deleting and in-app purchases. So particularly the in-app purchases, because there are instances where children particularly are playing their games and not realising that they're actually spending real money when they're buying things in their game. Now that's an issue if your child's iTunes account is connected to your credit card, which is obviously one of the reasons that we have made the suggestion that that's not the case unless you're using family sharing. So we have the option to turn that off so that your child is not able to do any in-app purchasing. Obviously, if they came to you with something that they particularly wanted or needed, then you would have the option to come in, flick that over, get what they need and flick it back. So that's always an option as well. So all of these top ones are allowing access to that particular app or function. So you can see you could block access to the iTunes store totally. The issue with that is when we're getting apps through the school's self-service portal, it still needs to access the iTunes store. So you would need to be aware of that, and if you've done that sort of setting and your child comes home and says that they needed something and it's not working, that would be a place to look. So then we go down to allowed content. So again, you're making the settings for what the other apps are able to do. So if we take a look, you can set obviously using the ratings for Australia. Music and newscasts, you can say whether you want explicit content allowed. Films, TV, books, apps. So again, if your child is free to purchase apps themselves, perhaps on their iTunes cards or whatever, then you may want to consider looking at some of those things there. Websites. A lot of parents like to look at this and either limit the adult content, which seems to be the most popular choice, just being aware that that will affect ECAT's ability to download files. Now, it's not because ECAT has adult content, it's just the way the system works with the files not technically being stored on that ECAT site. So it goes outside of that to find them, which comes under the adult content section. However, obviously that's something that parents would like to do, and it is very easy to add a website and add in the two that we need to be able to access our content from ECAT, and you'll see those appear on the next screen for you, so that you can choose to add a website, put it in, and then it will always be allowed. You can also, by the same token, you'll notice, choose to never allow a particular website. So you've got options there. And it's worthwhile, if that's something that is important to you, to explore those. We have various privacy settings. Now, back over on this left-hand side with the settings, there is also a privacy section, which it's worthwhile having a look at, particularly when we look at location services. So it's a good idea to have those conversations with your child about what and when they should be sharing their location, because obviously, particularly for younger children and teenagers, there are issues around the general public being able to know their location. So that can be set in privacy by the student, by the child. However, back in that restriction section, you have the opportunity to set it and have that override this. But again, I think it's worthwhile having those conversations with your child and making them aware of those decisions. So perhaps rather than being in restrictions, you might want to be in here, particularly if you're dealing with a teenage child as opposed to a very young child. So you can see for each individual app that has a location ability, I have the option to choose the options. So I can choose to have it allowing access to my location while I'm using it, or never. And again, you'll see it gives me a little explanation. So obviously, in the case of children and teenagers, you may choose to not have your a location tagged to photos. That could be something that's particularly worthwhile. So you can do that through each app and make some decisions there, which is probably quite worthwhile. And again, you can see in that privacy section, it gives you more information. So if we head back to restrictions, because I've gone out, you'll see I have to put it on. So obviously your child can't just pop in and change things unless they know the password. So again, all of those sorts of things that I had access to in privacy, parents can have access to there. There are also some interesting options down here in Allow Changes. Particularly one that might be of interest is this volume limit, where you can set the volume on the iPad and not allow that to be changed. So that might be something that's useful for some people, particularly if there seems to be an incredibly loud amount of sound coming out of your child's iPad. So it's worthwhile having a little look. Again, the Game Center, adding friends, allowing multiplayer games. These functions only work for the games that are within the Game Center, so not for games that they've purchased through apps or they've got as free games through the App Store. But it gives a little bit of control to parents, particularly of younger children. That might be an issue. So all of those things are in that restrictions.
The blocking websites using the restrictions, as we looked at in the video on the previous slide, does allow you to allow particular websites and, as we saw, not allow websites. Just a little aside, there were some parents who were looking to do things like, say for example, stop their child from accessing YouTube when they were wanting them to focus on homework, or something along those sorts of lines. A possible solution to that, obviously going along with the whole discussions with your child and setting parameters and expectations, but if there is a need to block something, this is something that you can do, switching on and off as you wish. So there's no reason that you can't pop into parental restrictions on the iPad, block something, and then when homework's finished, go in and delete that from the never allow list. This website down the bottom steps you through how to do that for YouTube, and also talks about if you're wanting to do something like that with YouTube, also making sure that you don't have the YouTube app enabled if that's the case. However, as I discuss in the Navigating the Online World session, ideally we're looking, you will have greater success with discussing expectations and those sorts of things, but coupling with that the fact that sometimes individual children do need to be blocked from something for whatever reason. So this could be a way that works for you for that.
So I'm going to just quickly show you another function that you have for controlling which app your child is in. It is in our settings in general and in accessibility. Now, most of the things in here relate to making the iPad function for people who have difficulties in one area or other. So you can see there's a lot of functionality related to voice with larger text and voiceover, etc., etc. So there's a lot of things within there. Further down the bottom is something under learning called guided access. Now the name is perhaps a little misleading because in reality it's really not guiding so much as prescribing. It is not a feature that will be widely useful, mainly because, as you see when you click on it, when it's on, it will keep the iPad in one single app, meaning that you can't go out of that app to access anything else. So for most students that's not particularly useful, because the way they're using the iPad is moving between apps, between textbooks and Word, or gathering images and then putting them in to explain everything, or movies, or whatever the case may be. So it really does limit the functionality of the iPad and does limit the the features that we want to use. However, having said that, there could be a situation where perhaps you need your child to be focused on one particular app, and it may be that you're using it in the flip side. If they're playing a game and you want them to only have a limited amount of time on that game or that website, then you could use it in that way. So if we take a look, we've gone into accessibility, and guided access would have been off. You've turned it on. You can set time limits so that a little sound goes, or also that it says to you, you have 30 seconds left, or whatever. And then it tells me to start using it, you have to go to the app that you're wishing your child to be locked into, triple click the home button, and then go from there. So we will set about doing that. So if I've decided that my child is going to be in Notebinder, then I'm going to open it, do 3 clicks, oops, and then I will get the guided access menu. So then I can choose to set time limits, which I probably would be doing more if it was a game type situation and I wanted them only to have a limited time. So I've set it for a minute. That's fantastic. And then we start. So I'm setting that, again, that's that parent passcode. So now I can do whatever it is that I want to do in here. My student can be doing whatever. But if they try to go out, it tells them that they can't. So then to go out, they have to enter the passcode. So perhaps it's an option. Like I said, it's very heavy-handed, but for some people, in some circumstances, that might be an option. So we will go out now. Okay, so again, just to remind you, that was in general, accessibility, down the bottom in guided access.
iCloud is named aptly enough as it is Apple's cloud storage facility. However, in broad terms, iCloud embraces things like the family sharing, the syncing of and accessing of work and information and data between your devices linked to that same Apple ID, as well as the backup of information on the, in this case, iPad, or be it iPhone or iPod, whatever it is. So it has a number of different elements in it, but essentially it is all cloud-based. So it's their secure cloud storage. The next slide will run through particularly iCloud as used for backup, because that's the focus for the students in relation to ensuring that their work is safe and retrievable.
Okay, we're going to take a look at storage and iCloud, which again is in our general section of settings, and storage and iCloud usage. There are 2 sections in here. The first is for the physical storage on the iPad. So this is a 32 gig iPad. You'll see I've used 24.7, available 1.6. You will notice that that does not add up to 32. That's because basically Apple uses about 4 gig of each iPad just with the proprietary stuff that they put on there. So you have the remaining. If I click into Manage Storage, it will give me details of each app and how much of the storage space it's taking. So if I'm getting low on space, I can make some decisions on, do I need these particular apps anymore, or can I do something to lessen how much space they're taking with their content. But most importantly, what we're looking at is the iCloud. Each Apple ID comes with 5 gig of iCloud storage, which is essentially used for the iPad to back itself up to the cloud. It means that if something happens and the iPad is suddenly dead or broken or needs to be totally restarted, you can pull back from the cloud most of the content that was previously on the iPad. Now, the good thing about this is that it does it automatically, provided you have the iCloud function set up. And you can do that at the time when you're setting up the iPad or later. If I go down on the left-hand side near the iTunes and App Store to iCloud, and I would put in the details of my Apple ID, I'd select to have the backup on, and again it tells me what it's going to do. And it also tells me when it was last backed up. If it's never been backed up, it'll tell me that too. It will say last backup, never. Now, here the provisos for when it does this magic is when the iPad is plugged in, locked, as in it's got that lock screen where you have to push the slide to unlock. She has the time on it as well. And it's connected to Wi-Fi. So for most people, if you're accessing Wi-Fi at home and the iPad's plugged in to charge at night, then it will back up, provided it's still on, but in that lock screen, as opposed to on an active screen inside an app. So it does that automatically. So to see where I'm going with that, I was back to General and my usage. I get 5 gig. You can see that I have available at the moment 931. If I'm getting close to full and I need to see what my options are, I go into the Manage Storage and it will give me the devices that are using that iCloud. So you can see I have 2 devices on the same Apple ID that are using this. Now, it becomes apparent the reason, or another of the reasons, why we've strongly suggested, that each individual child has their own Apple ID, because then they're getting their own 5 gig of storage for their iPad. If you are sharing with your child an Apple ID, or siblings are sharing, then obviously that 5 gig is spread far too thin, and it really is a handy resource to have. So apart from the other reasons, this one is the big one for us, particularly as we come into middle school. So I can have a look at this iPad. It's going to tell me the size of the backup, and I get choices. I can choose the data that I want to back up. Now you'll notice that my photo library is currently 4.5 gig. So if I chose to back that up, I wouldn't have space for any of the other things. schoolwork perhaps. So you have, or your child has the option to go through and make decisions about which apps will back up to this iCloud 5 gig and which ones won't. Usually it's the photos that are the biggest issue for our students, needing to either delete some of the many selfies and little videos that they've made, or if they are really important, choosing to save them to a home computer, just plug the iPad in, move them off, or use their OneDrive account that they have access to through school to store a lot of those photos, etc. The other thing is that at the end of units, we encourage the students to archive the work from those units onto OneDrive and also their H drive at school as well. So they've got plenty of spaces that they can back up to. The benefit of OneDrive is the fact that it's automatic. It's doing it each time they plug it into charge. So it's giving you that constant backup. So keeping that for the current stuff and using H drive for the archived things, and OneDrive obviously can be for any and all. So this is a place to go to if your backup is too large. Make some decisions about what needs to happen there. And again, that's another thing for our students to start to learn some self-management and organisation with that too. Okay, so again, if your iCloud wasn't set up, we can do that through the iCloud setting and choose to back up, and checking it through general and storage iCloud usage.